was already 44, very sexually experienced woman. I was having better sex than 90% of my friends. But I realized that I had only been scratching the surface.
Dominique De Vita is a registered nurse and certified transformational Tantra coach. She combines her clinical expertise with deep spiritual insight to help people harness their body's innate capacity for healing, pleasure, and love.
So many of us live from the neck up. We've been taught and conditioned as children, what are your grades? What are your test scores? So we turn into these thinking machines and we disconnect from being feeling machines. And that's heartbreaking because that's what the majority of our society is at. They have these quick little bursts of pleasure and then that's it. But Tantra is actually a path that brought me into it and shifted so much for me. And we can only connect to our lover and within their pleasure as deeply as we've connected and mastered our own. And that's where I met my first tantric lover that completely changed my life when I had my first soulgasm. It cracked me open to my core.
Welcome back to The Boundless Body. So check this out. 63.5% of you who are regular listeners haven't subscribed yet to the show. So please take a moment. It would be really helpful to click subscribe. It's free of charge. It will really help us out. In turn, we'll help you out by bringing you better and better content. Along those lines, send us an email with your feedback, boundlessbodypod@gmail.com. Send us your feedback about how you think we can do better. Give us questions to address on the show, interviewees you'd like us to interview. It'd be super helpful. Okay. Let's be a community. Dominique De Vita, welcome to the Boundless Body Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Gearing up to talk about sex.
Yay.
Sexual healing.
That's my theme song.
Nice. Yeah. And really look forward to getting your riffs on Soulgasms. That's cool. I like the term. So we'll start off I'll just read out your bio as is the ritual, doing ritual and sex talk. So Dominique De Vita is a registered nurse, certified master coach, trauma-informed, and a certified Tantra educator. Her mission is to help you live life fully from a place of magic, love, and abundance. As a registered nurse and a certified transformational Tantra coach, she's a healer. Think Marvin Gaye's sexual healing, our name that. Labels aside, she transforms lives. She believes that by blending science and spirituality, we can better understand our bodies, respect ourselves, and deepen our connection with our partners. That's why she uses a holistic approach in coaching to focus on harnessing the power of your body to master self-love. Ultimately, this self-love leads us to experience the pure bliss of soulful, connected love. Basically, she's the coach who teaches you how to get off the best while getting the most out of life. So getting off the best has to do with soulgasms, yes?
Yes. I think we don't get the right education on what's possible for us to experience in our bodies. And a lot of sex education too is layered in with shame and repression. And so then we'll go and turn to adult videos to try to figure things out. And it's dumbing down and diluting the power of what our sexuality and our sexual energy has the capacity to be. And it's so performative. And whenever you can have an experience that really rocks you to your core, to your soul, and you can be with a lover that can make love to your soul, is so life-changing. But what we have in our current, society and our world is that people just have this superficial skin-to-skin, egoic connection sex on this superficial level. And then they wonder why they can't find a soulmate, but they don't know how to do soul mating. So if you can only have superficial sex, then why are you so perplexed that your relationships are superficial and there's no depth to them? Because you don't know how to go into the depths. You're playing in the shallow water as far as what's available to you on the spectrum, of the range of sexual pleasure.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, I'm thinking about disembodiment because disembodiment, if you're not in your body, that, how are you going to expect to maximize your pleasure?
Yes.
You know what I mean? What is it? It's kind of like the creative tensional system, the body and the soul. It can tend towards splitting, where you have religion and then like the meat suit, religion, and then the kind of like just the kind of carrion container or something like that. That's like all fallen and contagious and carnal.
Yes.
And so I think it's just really important to reflect on sacred spirituality, sacred sexuality, sacred spirituality. That's a bit redundant, but we'll go with that.
Yeah.
Sacred sexuality, because it was a game changer for me and critical to the process was embodiment. Because it's like, again, if you don't know where your body is, or if you're not embodied, you don't have your GPS coordinates. If you don't have your GPS coordinates, how are you going to find the G spots? You need GPS for the G spots, and so on. But we're also in taboo territory, right? Because you've dabbled in sex magic and that's a layer of your work. And it's like, to some, sex just by itself is taboo. Well, let's keep it clinical, or let's keep it anatomical, or let's keep it as this like private place for just procreation or something like that. Or let's be obsessed with it and it's like all carnal and we're in the dungeon and stuff like that. And if you add magic in there, it becomes double taboo. Because magic, there's just an ancient tradition in the Catholic Christian tradition to associate magic and magical thinking with evil first, and then later when science came around as fluffy woojie stuff that's just like magical thinking and equated with the fluff heads. So we're in the territory of taboo, and I'm just wondering if you can maybe tell us a little bit of your story about encountering that taboo as you developed as a nurse practitioner and a surgeon's assistant and stuff like that, growing up in the Bible Belt. Just tell us, just kind of give us a bit of your history and relationship to the taboo.
Yeah, I'd love to. Definitely growing up in West Texas and in the Bible Belt, there's a lot of repression, a lot of judgment around sex and sexuality. At the time, I thought it was a curse, but ended up being a blessing. My mother was a very sexual woman. She didn't always go about it the right way, but she at least wasn't trying to repress those parts of me. Swimming in that soup of everything, and also the way religion was brought into my life in such a way that I could feel the hypocrisy when I go to church, that there was judgment. There was a disconnect between what people were trying to say and who they were being. They weren't embodying it, right? And so then it turned me off towards religion. But Tantra is actually a path that brought me into a really healthy relationship with spirituality and shifted so much for me. And, we can dive deeper and dissect that later, but it really kind of rekindled this and helped me have a lot of healing through that, because I realized it isn't just about like being in church and all these rules that were put in place, or all the fear that's layered into it. Because one of the bad things I did experience is my dad was also very religious and would have me go to church twice on Sundays and every Wednesday. And then they would have us watch these movies of the end of times. And I'm just like 6 or 7 years old. That's very traumatic to have a child watch something like that.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah. So removing myself from that, was like a really big thing. But when I left, thank goodness I left Texas to become a travel nurse. And at the time I was about to be 40. I had been interested in Tantra before, but I thought I needed a lover to begin. So I was like, all right, when I meet the person that wants to do this, because of Sting, I had heard about it. Yeah. Yes. And I was like, oh, sex for 5 hours? Sign me up. Now I'm a Scorpio. We're on Halloween. So I was like, yes, please. And not knowing, though, that I could have started the journey a decade before if I would have just done the solo Tantra practices, which would have also helped me to attract, because like attracts like, someone that would be a tantric lover, a candidate for me. right? But so many people, it's a big misconception. I need to have a lover to begin. No, it starts with you, and then you attract better lovers through the process, through the journey. And also, I just want to add in here, I'm an RN first assistant, and it's similar to a nurse practitioner, and I could take the role of an assisting surgeon, but I'm not like a nurse practitioner, just for clarity. I think I was create a little confusion there. But I went and left and did critical care nursing at this initially as a travel nurse, and worked at UCLA in the neurotrauma ICU, at USC in the cardiothoracic ICU. So everything with the brain, neuroscience, the heart, always fascinated me. Helping with open heart surgeries always fascinated me. And with Tantra, I realized that these are the tools that really open people's hearts. And this is how I really had so much healing. So thank goodness I got away from Texas to be in a different energetic and experience. And that's where I met my first tantric lover that completely changed my life when I had my first soulgasm. It cracked me open to my core.
Your first soulgasm. That sounds epic.
It was.
Well, could you take us in to kind of like perhaps some somatic elements to that first experience? Maybe take us in lightly and maybe, I don't know, PG-13 leaning towards R, maybe, and we'll just kind of just go in and just make it visceral for us, that first soulgasm.
It was such an incredible experience. What I realized was, one, I did not know he had studied Tantra. He had mastered for men, and now I teach men how to do this, how to have non-ejaculatory orgasms and to be multi-orgasmic and have stamina for hours.
Mm-hmm.
And also when you do Tantra, by meditating a lot, you also can be more dropped in and present and connected with your lover. So to flash back, in Texas, I had a lover that I had had 20 orgasms with the first time I was with him. But I didn't have a desire, even though it was great, I didn't have the desire to be with him again. I couldn't figure out why. And he shared with me after, I was thinking of math equations in my head so I wouldn't finish too fast. But the thing was, there's that disconnect.
Well, if that isn't a dude, okay, Tantra dude.
So,
okay, pi. How many digits can I think about pi? That's hilarious.
So this is before my tantric lover, right? But that was that disconnect. I realized after I experienced Tantra and I reflected back, you can connect the dots looking back. I was like, the reason I'm really not desiring to be with him and I didn't want to be with him again, and we've stayed as friends, is that he was disconnected. He was off in his imagination and he wasn't bringing in that piece of the embodiment that you talked about. And that's what so many of us, if you look at our world, so many of us live from the neck up. We've been taught and conditioned as children, how smart are we? What is our future career going to be? We're asked all the time. What are your grades? What are your test scores? What are your SATs? How many boring facts can you remember and regurgitate at a time? So that we turn into these thinking machines and we disconnect from being feeling machines. And what Tantra helps you to do is drop into your body through your 5 senses so that you can actually feel and have that embodiment. And the embodiment is the secret sauce, because so many times people want to transform or have a transformation. But before Tantra, even my adult daughter, I'd had a traumatic childhood. And my adult daughter had said, I could see that you would read all the self-help books and you would get better for a period of time, and then you would go back to the challenging ways that you had and the things that were ingrained in you from childhood and the traumas that you experienced. And then she goes, it wasn't until Tantra that you started to shift. And I think that's a lot of things too that I want to share with the listeners here today. Is a lot of times we think if we buy a book and have the self-help books, the shelf help, that we'll read it and be changed. But if you just read it and you only retain the information and you don't embody it, you don't get the transformation. And that's like a missing piece. So Tantra helped me have the embodiment of dropping into my body and really opening myself up. But when I had my first soulgasm, what I noticed was different was that whenever we were making love, each time that I was in an orgasmic state, my lover was unshakable. I just noticed he hadn't shared with me that he had this special skill set that most men don't have. He hadn't shared with me that he had this level of mastery, but just looking at his body, and he was just unshakable. And it was like honoring of the goddess, like making love as a prayer, as a devotion to the other, and that sacredness of it. And then him just creating holding a space for all of the orgasmicness to flow. And when you think of masculine and feminine energy dynamics, I like to think of masculine energy as like the riverbanks. And then the feminine energy is the flow of the rushing water. And if the flow isn't going to completely flow, the passionate, powerful ways, if it doesn't feel like it has the riverbanks to hold it, because then what you're going to create is destruction and chaos and flooding. And so it's that containment of the pleasure of actually let me allow the full orgasmicness and everything, the water, the feminine energy, the pleasure to fully flow.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew that he could hold it. And it also had me realize that as I reflected back with other lovers, I would kind of like a horse, you're pulling in the reins. I had to hold back my levels of pleasure so that I wouldn't push my lover to the point of no return and it was game over, because I did want us to last longer. I have another lover that will still tease me to this day sometimes when we talk, and he'll say, just one more minute. Because that's how I tell him. I'd be like, just one more minute. Just give me another minute. I would just do not finish now. I still want to play. And so I literally was putting a cap, hitting a glass ceiling in a way of where my pleasure could be, because I felt if I went full all out and I really allow myself to fully experience and express my range of orgasmicness, the person they wouldn't be able to keep up with me on that. And he was able to.
Yeah.
So within this experience, and we were able to share intimacy and pleasure for a period of 5 hours. We were on no substances, and it felt timeless. Time flies when you're having fun. Like maybe an hour had passed maximum. When we were done, it was 5 hours. But what happened in that is with Tantra, the Kundalini energy, like the energy in my root chakra, it all went up into my third eye and my crown chakra open.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that's like the soulgasmic experience of one, having pleasure, not just located in my genitals, not just a G-spot orgasm, a clitoral orgasm. This was rocked me to the core of my being, and I could feel like a heartgasm, a braingasm, like full body orgasmicness. And being in these prolonged states of ecstatic bliss was deeply healing for my nervous system as well as in this experience. And then that experience had me question everything, because I was already 44, very sexually experienced woman. At the time, I was a recurring guest on Playboy Radio giving sex tips. And my friends would tell me, you should publish a book. Your tips saved my marriage. I was having better sex than 90% of my friends. But I realized that I had only been scratching the surface, like the tip of the iceberg of what was possible for me with pleasure. And that's heartbreaking, because that's what the majority of our society is at. They have these quick little bursts of pleasure, and then they drop, and then that's it. Yeah.
So this math guy had some containment skills by way of using his algorithms and so on to give you a bigger container to go to the next level with your pleasure and to experience that upwelling of biological force, psychospiritual, if we want to call it, force that is called Kundalini by the yogis and by Wilhelm Reich, the great somatic psychologist and the prophet of the orgasm. He calls it biological life energy. It's like a biological
life force energy.
Mm-hmm. Biological life force energy. Essentially flowing across the entire animal kingdom. He studied things like paramecium, and amoebas. And what he saw was plasma currents, that he eventually ended up calling organ energy.
Wow.
And he basically thought that the entire universe was orgasmic. And in biology, you have this biological fluctuation of what he thought were actually ion gradients, like calcium ions, which in my book, I go at length into the science of bioelectricity. To me, as a scientist, I'm really interested in how to ground cosmological and, sort of abstract seeming principles like Kundalini that can feel really, really out there to people, especially the people that have big taboos about Tantra. And then they hear Kundalini and see the snake or whatever in their primitive religious background, goes, oh, that's evil shit, right? Because, snake in the body, and snake is evil, and wow. So I actually prefer to keep it at the level of biological energy. I mean, even though I know and feel and have a history with encountering what people call Kundalini, in general, I tend to shy away from the framework.
Yeah.
And I have a little bit closer kinship now with Reich's concept of organ energy, even though I don't use that. I think of it more as calcium ion fluctuations in the body, electrical potentials fluctuating through the core of the body. That's what I go into at length in my book.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I want to add, the thing is like Kundalini and all those things, these practices were over 5,000 years ago. So they did not have the science or the ways of looking into things. So it's kind of like a metaphor of how that current feels flowing up through your body.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's also interesting to me, if you think of the medical staff in the medical field, the caduceus is actually a staff with two serpents wrapping up it, which is kind of the symbolism with Kundalini of up your spine, the two serpents wrapping around to the top. Which is really interesting to me. But there is like a movement of energy. So it's more, metaphorical. Because I definitely did have snakes inside my body, right?
Yeah, I just like to continuously qualify to the audience.
Yes. So it's not confusing.
Yeah, that there is a bridge being built over time between science and these ancient traditions, if the thinking is integral, in regards to looking at the scientific data and looking at the great traditions, and there's an embodied inquiry, embodied research, then there can be a bridge between the two fields. And me personally, I think the best contender is calcium ion fluctuation. And that's in my book and something I'm really passionate about. So Reich's model, was that, over time, this natural biological fluctuation of energy that's like natural in children, like you watch a child at the park on a swing, just swinging with glee. There's this natural pulsatile up and down flow through the core of the body. And there's this glee and this bliss. It's a biological force of energy that's just going naturally through the body. And it approximates the sexuality piece. And this is what Freud was into when he made the connection that, hey, there's something adjacent to sexuality in the developing body. And that gets all weird in the Oedipal complex where, you have this complexity of something that's adjacent to sexuality in terms of the lovely feeling and this a wellspring of energy going up in the body. And children are embodied. They'll go on grandpa's lap and they'll just move how a body wants to move. Right. You know what I mean? Like in the first 6 months of life, right? We put my little girl in the car seat, and that we put the seatbelt on her, and she's back there going, "Oh yeah, oh yeah." And it's really taboo to talk about this stuff that a little being could have a sexuality.
Right.
And it needs to be talked about. And this is one of the things that Reich was really passionate about. He's like, listen, folks, our bodies are always communicating, and parents' bodies are communicating. When that child brings that blissful energy, that pulsatile flow, you need to be aware when your body locks up, because you're communicating to that child to sort of armor, that was Reich's term, to armor against that fluctuation of life force. And then so over time, what happens is the body becomes armored against this endowment, this endowment that it's our birthright to receive this blissful, being on the swing and being tickled in a non-invasive way. Like weirdly enough, Reich, one of his places of research to study the orgasm reflex was actually in tickling people.
Yeah, there are people that have a tickle fetish as well.
Right? Because it's like you can actually assess really well where the armoring is in a person by tickling them. And so Reich was a master at being able to kind of read where the tube, because the core tube is where the biological energy fluctuates through the body, the neural tube and so on. At being able to read where the blockages were, and he was an expert plumber at being able to get a person in the direction of soulgasm. He didn't use that term, but that term is indicative of a clear flow of biological energy going through the body all the way up through the brain. And then he had this term called superimposition, meaning that when we're in union sexually, that union connects us to the great cosmic organ and plugs us into the mystery of the universe.
Yes. And I love that so much. And, it's interesting too, because in Tantra, they talk about the nudity, the inner flute that people have, and then the energy centers, the chakras. And so it was this tube the tube that's going through us where our circuitry is flowing. And if one of these chakras is blocked, that's also like the armoring where we get blocked in certain areas because of either past traumas or messaging from our parents, or where we heartbreak or hurt, where we start to shut down. And so regular sex a lot of times is, I feel based on what you're sharing too, is like you're short circuiting yourself. Like you're only having a quick fleeting genital buzz orgasm experience, and then boom, it's done and you're over. So it's kind of like a short circuiting of your whole full circuitry isn't on board and online. But then whenever you're able to do these other things and do the dearmoring and really have your whole vessel open, then you can have the biocircuitry, the full circuit is online instead of having blocks to it and the current not being able to flow.
Well, maybe I'll be a bit edgy and vulnerable here and talk a little bit about my own journey with Tantra and discovering my armor in my body, my knots in my plumbing.
Yes.
And so when I was an adolescent, I had a condition that's common to a lot of males called gynecomastia. Okay. It's common to adolescent males. You're familiar with it?
Yeah. I used to work with a plastic surgeon, and we would do surgeries if they wanted that tissue removed.
Exactly. Okay. So gynecomastia is an inflation of the breast tissue in an adolescent male, but not just an adolescent male. It's an inflation. Sometimes folks that are on antipsychotics, men that are on antipsychotics will get gynecomastia because there's endocrine modulators in antipsychotics. And there was radical psychological wounding and implications for me during adolescence when my breasts just kind of swelled up, and I got shamed for it. I got called bitch tits. You know what I mean? So, and like, it's this locker room thing where I'm, and then I just learned to hide it so I was like constantly worried about my chest. This is not talked about enough in the field of psychology. You've seen it. You've seen that it brings some men to the operating table.
Yeah, a lot of shame around it.
Deep shame. And so that's what happened to me. I got this deep shame in regards to my chest and hiding my chest. And in essence, over time, it became body armoring. And I was armored here and I didn't know it. And, through a series of events, I found myself living and working at a healing arts institute, but surrounded by body workers and people that were wise in the ways of bioenergetics. I had a practitioner that read my body and knew precisely that I was holding that in my chest.
Wow.
And so this is the weirdest thing, that because it sounds to the listener, I don't know where you're going to take this, listener, but I'm sharing something vulnerable about an essential moment of healing in my life that sounds a bit weird, where this practitioner who was clearly dialed into the energetics ended up taking my nipples in a non-erotic way, non-blatantly erotic, in a kind of clinical way, but gentle and compassionate way, doing physiological, muscular, fascial connective tissue unwinding with my nipples. Okay. And so that process literally de-armored me in one session.
That's
This person
amazing.
is a genius healer. Amini Peller, thank you very much for your powerful work. You changed my life forever. So that unlocking put me in deep touch with my inner feminine, okay, in such a way that I could claim the nurturer in me, the kind of inner woman or the inner feminine that can nurture through this space. And, as Reich said, the unlocking process and on the way to biological energy flowing through this tube, this flute, happens, non-linearly. Okay. So that was like my first big unlock was in my chest. And then the next one was my throat and then the eyes. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe you could riff on that a little bit. I've just kind of given you a vulnerable share about my own de-armoring process. Maybe you could share a bit about your de-armoring process, or perhaps grab a clinical case or a client case where there was a moment of de-armoring that you'd like to share.
Yes, I think what I see so common, what I experience within myself, and I see very common when I work with clients, is that a lot of us are blocked in this heart space. We have armoring here. And it's either from mother-father wounds. And one of the things that I learned when I became a trauma-informed master coach is over 95% of adults received inadequate parenting. And it doesn't mean your parents didn't love you. They did the best they could with the tools they had, but just were not taught how to be good parents or to be good lovers, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And so that blockage there blocks that circuitry from everything fully flowing up. So we armor to protect, and we feel like this is a protection that we're doing to keep the pain out, but it's more of a barrier than a protection. We're also keeping a lot of good things from flowing to us. So somatically, and with the fascia is so connected to everything, with being able to move your fascia in that way and the somatic practices so you could have some heart opening and expansion, that allowed that energy, to flow through you. And then also receiving that healing of someone not shaming you on your body and just literally giving a helping hand and being in support of you and honoring you in that process, and you feeling seen through that, is also deeply cathartic and healing, because we can hold so much shame about our bodies because our society is always trying to project onto us inadequacies within our bodies. For me, I was actually flat-chested. I'm always been curvy. My sisters, when I was 7, they nicknamed me Bubble Butt. And until J-Lo and Selena came onto the scene, it was not something that you would want to have. And everything was about having big breasts, and I did not have big breasts. And so later when I worked with a plastic surgeon, I got implants. And, it was a bonus. It was one of the perks of working with a perky perk, working with a plastic surgeon. But now, as I've done so much healing and I feel so much more comfortable in my body, and that I'm non-GMO, I eat really healthy. And I'm like, well, these definitely are not non-GMO. But they did give me the confidence to do modeling and to go to LA and to do other things on my journey that I wouldn't. So I'm grateful for the process, but definitely don't feel like I need to have them. But there's so much about our body image for men and women, because we will consume more and be good consumers if we always think that we're not enough and we feel inadequate in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been actually teased by peers for being flat-chested, and I would never change my clothes in front of my siblings or my mom or anyone or friends. And so those things can really hold us back because we don't want to be teased or to look different. than the people around us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And that's deeply healing as you restore that balance within yourself. And I'll have my clients too, when they're trying to open this heart center and they're doing certain self-pleasure practices, if they enjoy nipple play and sensation, to even do that is in a self-pleasure way. Because think of when you go to an acupuncturist and you look at the foot, and it will show that the liver, the kidney, all these things are connected. But the head of the penis is also connected to the heart space, and your nipples are connected or along that meridian in line with your heart space. So for you to have the heart space opening, having stimulation to your nipples is also very helpful.
Yeah. Total game changer. I grew up in Minnesota at the top of the Bible Belt. My body was on freeze. It was frozen. And that was one of the key areas of frozenness, but my whole body was essentially. The next kind of phase of unlocking for me was like, this is another taboo thing, right? Because this community was a clothing optional community. And it's like, you hear these terms, oh, a nudist colony. Oh, a nudist colony. It's just such a fucked up term, you know, like masturbation. I hate that term, Dominique. It has so many moral implications to the terminology, and also the word suicide. I don't like that term because it has the same quality as homicide. And so those are the two words that I challenge the most when I'm training psychologists, because they carry so much moral weight.
Yes.
You know, masturbation, I reframe it in the same way that you do, as self-pleasure.
Self-pleasure. And as a self-love practice as well.
Yeah. Yep. So Dominique, I lived in a nudist colony.
Okay. and Dr. B, I want to share this with you. I want you to think about how bizarre our world is.
Yeah.
You know, and there was a funny meme and a funny thing by comedian Dave Chappelle. And he was just saying, you know, like slut shaming. He was like, oh my gosh, she's such a slut. I bet she was born naked. It's like,
I bet she was born naked. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it's
and I'm a fuck boy. And I must have been born naked too. Yeah. Thanks for the circumcision, by the way. That was very nice.
And that's the big trauma. And think of the tip of your penis in a circumcision is also creating more trauma and armoring to your heart, because those are connected within like acupressure points.
Oh yeah. I mean, for real.
That's the first trauma. The first trauma a person, and I know that you know this, but for the listeners, the first trauma a person experiences is being born in a hospital. Just that birthing process is a traumatic experience. And then for men, don't realize, because you don't recall the memory of being circumcised as a small baby, that was super traumatic. You're literally being violated, going under anesthesia, being cut, you're in pain. It's crazy that we do these things. But I also want you to think about in our world how, you know, animals, except dogs, because a lot of times people will dress up their dogs. But like in nature, there's all the lions or all the zebras don't have clothes on, but we don't refer to them as a nudist colony and make it shameful.
It's so silly.
But the thing is that, and our society and our world has perverted sex. They have perverted nudity. Yeah. And that's why there's shame attached to it, because people are having an unhealthy relationship with their bodies and other people's bodies. But we are programmed to have shame and to hide ourselves and to hide our bodies from a very young age. And with, you know, the conditioning of my society.
And you see like this framework of like the primitive humans that are still walking around in Africa naked or something like that. And they're like somehow like these kind of pagan idiots and, you know, unsaved people that need to be taken into the white halls of glory and purity or something like that.
Craziness.
In fact, it's like, you know, wait, hang on. I'm not saying that this is an image of perfection and that there's not things that like rape and stuff like that never happens in regions like that. because people will be people wherever they are.
Right.
But it's like, this weird image that like, it actually, it's about in Western Eurocentric reality, there's just been a huge split between body and soul. And it's like the technology to actually contain the erotic potencies, have a container for them. That having a container for them has become a repression apparatus that armors bodies and then creates a consequence of excessive force that generates enormous industries like the porn industry and stuff like that. And I'm not shaming on the porn industry. I do an informal poll with students, how, in terms of data, what percentage on the internet do you think is porn or pornographic or erotic content? And I get, figures all the way from like 5% ramping all the way up to something like 60 or 70% of total data. I mean, that is a lot of energy.
Yeah, it definitely is. And the thing is, we can look at societies where they're not wearing clothes and they're more to their native traditions, and we can feel like they're falling behind, but maybe are they really ahead? Also, it reminds me of this thing of, okay, if it is about when a woman is raped, if it is about the clothes that she's wearing, then why do women that are lesbians not rape other women based on the clothing that they're wearing? Because the thing is, the lack of clothing or what you're wearing does not give someone else permission to violate you and to have non-consensual engagement with you. And if you do not know, because even they'll teach young boys in school, girls don't wear your shorts too short because that's distracting for boys. Why not teach boys and men how to handle seeing skin and not sexualize it all the time? And to know that is not giving permission or consent to go any further. It's almost like women, the way we dress, we have to take on responsibility for how men will behave towards that. Because if I dress sexy, I'm dressing sexy for me because this is something I want to wear. Or maybe I'm going to see my lover later and I want to see them. And it doesn't mean that if someone else sees that and is enticed by it, that they get to push their desires upon me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Blaming the victim, slut shaming, all that stuff.
It's really wild. Our world is wild, but sex sells. We'll use it to sell, or we'll use it in a perverted way, and we'll make it bad or wrong or shameful to control human behavior. But we need to be liberated by our sexuality. We need to feel comfortable in our bodies and our skin and stop living under so much shame.
I think a really important issue is containment, because you mentioned this image of boys needing to be taught, not to sexualize exposure to skin and so on. I think, another way to put it is that boys need to be taught how to contain and circulate the biological intensities in response to stimuli, natural animal stimuli that get the male organism ready to do what male organisms do. Okay?
Exactly.
And if we don't have a container, and if we're not taught how to be positive about our experience as a biological entity, then it just ends up being a repression thing. And then that repression again creates a counterstroke where there's too much pressure then in the male psyche, because we're not taught containment, and then we're just blasting all over the place. And this is why it's so important for men to have a phase. Like for me, a really important phase was, as you mentioned earlier, learning, sort of orgasm retention or ejaculation retention.
Yes.
So this was a crucial moment in my life where you kind of knock out the drivenness to achieve the pinnacle of pleasure, which may not really be the pinnacle at all, which is an orgasm or ejaculatory orgasm. And so once I learned that technology and I had a container for myself, I could then filter the biological energy inside a container, and then just much more responsible in my life when I'm responding to whatever it is out there. There's the stimulus, right? There's the male organism responding, and then just keeping it in the cooker.
Yeah, I love
in
that.
The wine barrel.
And your ability to respond is your responsibility. And then the other thing is we're reacting. So if if our nervous system isn't regulated, if we don't have tools and we react on every impulse and we don't know how to have that containment, how to be in our empowered space and make the best decisions for ourselves. And if you're hearing stories of, that, masturbation is bad or wrong, then of course you're going to have more of a desire to interact with someone else, because how else do you release that energy? And so when you know how to be empowered by your sexual energy, you know how to use it and direct it and use it as this biocircuitry to light up your channel in your body.
Yeah.
It's such a game changer, but men can constantly are shooting their life force energy out and draining it and having these short little quick fleeting orgasms that aren't as cathartic. And I do want to go back to one thing. I was thinking when I had my soulgasm, because it rocked me to my core of my being. It was such a deep, cathartic healing, like the sexual healing Marvin Gaye sings about, orgasmic experience. The only thing I could think of was soulgasm. And then a year or so later, I was reading a book by Osho, and in his book, he talks about soulgasms. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's just the only wording I could think of. I thought I created that word, but obviously not. But that's, how he would explain it as well, because it's such on a deeper level. But if we don't, we can only connect to someone's emotions as deeply as we've connected to our own. And we can only connect to our lover and within their pleasure as deeply as we've connected and mastered our own. And so whenever you know how to hold space for these really deeper experiences, then you can share a deeper experience with someone else.
Nice.
But having, if teenagers knew how to have healthy self-pleasure that's, liberating for them and healing, I think they can make better decisions too. Because I want you to think, if you're starving and you're kind of sex starved and you don't really have an outlet or know how to use, because just like the saying, with great power comes great responsibility. Your sexual energy is a very great power. Mm-hmm. And so it's all your intentionality and know how you use it. It can be a tool. It can be a weapon. It depends on how you're utilizing that. And if we taught our teens how to experience this pleasure as a healing and empowering practice and as a self-love ritual for themselves, it'd be so different. Because the other challenge is in other species and animals, whenever they're at the developmental stage where they are able to procreate and reproduce, they do. They don't have their adult animals saying, wrong on you, you shouldn't do that, that's shameful, you've got to wait until you're married, this, that, and the other. But we have children who their hormones are raging as teens, and then we're saying, oh no, you need to wait and hold on to that for a few more years. And there are good reasons, because unplanned pregnancies and other things their bodies may be physiologically ready, but they are not emotionally ready for those types of consequences. But I think if we empowered our children and think about what happens when you go to the grocery store when you're starving, you just throw all the junk food in your cart, right? And it's the same thing with our sexual energy. If we're denying ourselves pleasure, or people are being no-fap or celibate and they think self-pleasure is wrong or bad, then when they go on a date with someone or they're with someone, they're kind of starving for it. So they may be more open to making an impulsive decision. And instead of throwing all the junk food in your cart, the junk relationships or partners that you could have, just to scratch that itch that you're having.
Yeah. Yeah. When I got the technology, the microcosmic circuitry, this idea of having a container to keep the ejaculation from, sort of spewing out of the container, keeping things in the wine barrel, as it were.
Yeah.
I could then, because for me, it wasn't with a lover at first, or my lover was myself. It was solo sex.
Love that.
Solo sex union for me in the beginning with my Tantra studies. So reading the kind of classic work of Mantak Chia, and then getting this framework of containment to circulate and then heal myself. And once this kind of nipple thing was done. And so, by the way, I don't I'm not like, hey, I'm going to do that with my clients every day now, and we're going to do nipple unwinding with everybody. It's nothing formulaic like that. It's very individual. But once I had that containment and circulation circuitry, it really paved the way for me to have my first soulgasm, which I actually, even though I had lost my virginity, I really consider it as my real losing of my virginity the first time I had a soulgasm.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So, and I remember, and she just like, I still love this person forever. She's an Inuit woman, and blessings to you and that, lineage over there. It was just this moment on the grass, out in the mountains, and just like this mind blowing connection with the universe. It was just incredible. So much of this stuff is developmental. If I did not have that phase of learning how to keep things in the wine barrel, I wouldn't have gone to where I can go now. Also, I just want to put in this cautionary note that when I did get with a lover over time, I became so attached to the containment method that I felt like if a woman ever took me out, and this is sort of, I believe this is implicit in the literature a bit, and I've seen it in the Tantra communities, that it's kind of like this weird power struggle. Like if you take me out of my containment methodology, then I'm losing my power. And so I kind of took that on as a stage of my development, where I had a partner that basically said, hey, I feel like you are distancing yourself from me and being permanently married to your containment practice. And now looking back, I can go, holy shit, I was actually really arrogant in trying to get to my process of enlightenment by holding something back from my lover, because I was so obsessed with maintaining my consciousness and my power and kind of climbing up the ladder to evolve. And so I really got stuck in this kind of hubris ladder around the containment method. I just wanted to put that out there as a cautionary note to men.
Yeah, I love that you shared that. And I've also attended workshops with Master Montauk Chia. He's really incredible. And when I first had my tantric lover that was able to do this, there's also a conditioning by women that I will share. Think about adult videos, the money shot, right? All of this of like when a man finishes is such a focus. And so subconsciously for women, when men are trying to practice semen retention, if the woman doesn't understand the benefits to it as well, it can feel like, oh, I'm not turning them on enough because they're not finishing. And then that can be a block. So it's really important to have these conversations and understand what your goals are. But even Montauk Chia in his writings, he says, based on your age and your health status, you can ejaculate so many times per week or per month. So there are times that you can go ahead and ejaculate. But I did, my first tantric lover, he could sense that I was trying to get him to ejaculate. And he was like, what are you doing? And because he could feel me like really trying to pull it from him. And then he was like, what are you even doing? He was frustrated with me. And I'm just like, oh, well, I'm a nurse and it's like really good for your prostate. But I think if you do other things with prostate play or prostate massage, if you're not putting shame up on your body and exploring your body, and you're able to experience those things, then, your prostate is going to be fine.
Yeah.
But so when I learned more with Tantra, I was like, oh yeah, sorry, I did that. But there is a thing of women were very intuitive. So especially when men are first trying to learn how to have this mastery, I'm like, don't do the practices with your partner, because it does feel, especially when you're not masterful with it and then you're stopping and pausing. It's literally like we can feel like you're in with us and then you're retreating. And especially if that person has an abandonment wound, it can feel like I'm here, I'm not here, I'm over here,
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're still kind of running that model of the classical Montauk Chia model, where you kind of lose consciousness and Jing and life force energy when you jizz. But I totally disagree at this point.
Okay, good. Share with me some more. I'd love to talk to.
That's not my experience as a man.
Okay.
I personally feel like in my own journey, it was a key developmental stage. But I actually think in the community, there's the community of men that are involved with retention. I think there's a lot of arrogance.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Wrapped up in I am the retainer.
Yeah.
I am the great retainer and I can go so many hours, and it just ends up being another male ladder of hierarchy. And I
That's
can
true.
speak for myself because I was part of that hierarchy. And
Yeah.
this model that would just, okay, retain because it's bad and you'll lose your consciousness and your power, I think is total bullshit and a recipe for hubris.
Yeah. I love that you shared that. I
Yeah.
think that there's certain things like when men, I think it's about being able to have mastery over your energy and not letting that energy or desire control you or run the show. Like you're the master of it and you get to decide for yourself when you're doing certain things and how you go about it. You know what I'm saying? It is great. It's really beautiful when you're able to do that so that women are able to have longer experience of orgasmic bliss because of the orgasm gap. And there are benefits to that. But when we let anything mess with our ego or we give something too much power, then that can be a dangerous thing too. So I really like what you're bringing into this conversation. And especially you've had this lived experience. So thank you.
Yeah. So we do have this tendency as humans to get inflated in our ideologies and get on these various ladders, and it's just like accumulate social currency.
Yeah.
And there's a particular type of social currency involved in the containment community, and in my experience. And it's just another way of being arrogant, which, it has proliferated on planet Earth to just to the extreme, different ways of being arrogant and grandiose. And, my way of doing sex is better and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it really is endless. And I just want to, kind of bring compassion to all the ways and the methods that we clunk around with these intensities of being human and having this big bulgy brain of ours.
Yeah.
Or just bring compassion to the many ways that we struggle with self-expression. Because, what Reich was talking about is that, yes, the orgasm reflex and the orgasmic kind of cosmic organism, the consequences of being a cosmic organism as a human and with the big bulgy brain is that the orgasmic reflex can be deployed in many different ways of self-expression. He thought that the key area for armoring, the most common area for armoring in the human organism was the face. And then a close second was the pelvis. Now, and what he saw and what he witnessed is that as orgasmic potential starts to rise in the body, it will hit armoring zones like what I shared about the nipples. But the most common place in humanity is in the expressive apparatus from the throat up through the eyes and how we express through here. Okay. So like, I'm not married to, seminal ejaculation as being the kind of orgasmic outflow, but another consequence is a somatic, neuroscientist, somatic practitioner in the Reichian tradition is that I find that there's this paradox in the Tantra community of men that are focused on containment, that even though they explore emotional release as part of the Tantra training practice, that there can be this rigidity coming from the practice of holding and containing and holding and containing, as Reich saw, a rigidity in the face. And faces are very, very sensitive. Some of the most powerful orgasms are when the face smashes out of its crystallized patterning in terms of musculature. And we do this crazy but still toe the line of the coherence of the biological flow of energy. And so like eyes open orgasm, but not eyes open orgasms where things lock up in the jaw, which the things tend to lock up in the jaw when the intensity is ramping up in the body or in the pelvis. I'm just trying to offer that, if we excessively focus on containment, then the expressive dimension can sort of, what's this, like a seesaw?
Does it remind you of a little bit like the rigid personality pattern of like trying to control too much?
Precisely.
Yes.
So people and I can meet developmentally, I was at a very rigid stage in my own development when I got into this containment approach. And so rigid types at a rigid developmental stage can kind of stay in that region of things for maybe the rest of their life.
Yeah.
When, to me, for wholeness, there needs to be a diversification of the expressive pole. So we have expression and containment that are a dynamic system. And then we can diversify how we express through the face and through laughter and through chuckling as we're fuckling, as
Yeah.
it were.
I know. I think my best lover that I've had, like, we're totally comfortable being so orgasmic together, laughing together while we're being intimate. Like everything is welcome, in that space. We're not trying to contort ourselves or wear a mask, you know what I'm saying? Or, try to be so performative with sex. And, when they do these diagrams, I like what you share what Reich is saying about the pelvic area and the face, because even the throat, if you look at a cross-section of diagram, the anatomy looks very similar. The cross-section of a pelvis and the musculature, and these things are connected. I can tell when people have blockages here, they're usually blocked in the pelvis and back, vice versa.
Yep.
But also thinking about the face, even before it popped in, even before you showed the expressiveness of the face with orgasms, is I think so many people are controlled here because they are so self-conscious of their O face. And I've had clients that have worried about this. And so don't want to look too out of control with it or scary or not look beautiful or not look like an adult star would look during the moment, right? And you want to stay poised. And that's why sometimes I feel like, if you see a woman that can laugh, and I'm able to do this, like someone that can just laugh and belly laugh very loud, I think they're probably going to be better in bed with their orgasmicness because they are comfortable being in their fullest expression. And I feel like laughter is almost like this orgasmic expression of the soul. And you know what I mean? It's just bubbling up and allowing things to come through and not contorting or being rigid or controlling, and just really allowing everything to just be fully felt and move through us instead of like blocking it through the face, blocking it through the pelvis.
Yep.
And I also do see in the tantric circles where they can be, which is not what I want to be contributing to, is kind of like the spiritual fuck boys, and with this coming from this egoic thing and like,
I'll initiate you into the ways, via the direct method. And, I'll put you on the ladder and you could learn the containment method and you will be powerful like me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that I've definitely experienced that. That's quite a journey. And so it is new levels to different things. But I also want to ask you something, like, what I do like about learning some things with containment as a practice of like just knowing how to feel and sense when your energy is flowing so that you can last as long as you want to with your partner and as long as you both desire to. But even when my clients will say, oh, well, I finished, and I will always tell them when I'm first teaching self-pleasure practices and edging to them, I'm like, if you finish or finish sooner, do not shame yourself. This is what your body is designed to do. Enjoy that experience. Like, how long do you allow yourself to sit and bask in the amazingness of that before you hurry up and grab something to clean up or move to the next thing? Just breathe that pleasure in through you. It's so healing, and allow yourself to sit in it and enjoy the juiciness of that moment, because this shouldn't be a shaming process. This is just something to me about seeing and playing within your range, and also seeing the benefits that it can help people that have PE or ED to strengthen erections or have more control. But with that, I want to lay a segue into this and see if you can help me with this. What are your thoughts? I do have a client that has challenges with PE. And I noticed that he has like that rigid personality pattern. And so it's a thing of like in the outside world and in business, he can knock everything out of the park, make things happen. He's just going to do the things and it's going to happen. And he's trying to bring that into the practice because he's finishing fast. I'm like, it's actually all that tension you're holding in your body with the rigidity that is making you finish faster. But he just thinks that he can, like, if I'll invite other ways to do it, his thoughts are like, I'm so used to making things happen. I can just make it do this way. And I'm just like, well, this is exactly why you're not getting the result you're hoping for, because you are having way too much tension in your body. And that's actually part of your challenge. I would love from your perspective what you think about that.
So, and just so that you can qualify to the audience what PE is, just so we get a thorough.
PE is premature ejaculation, and then ED is erectile dysfunction. Thank you.
PE and ED. So Reich had this fundamental binary, and it's not just, Reich, this is fundamental to neuroscience, called the charge and discharge model. We are a reciprocal tension system, and the whole body speaks this language of tension, where you have flexors and extensors. But at the neural level, you have this kind of gathering of electric ion potentials and so on, where you have a building up of charge and then a discharge across neurons. It's like a basic language in neurology, charge and discharge. Okay.
Got you.
So, and that happens at the micro level and it happens at the macro level. So, it happens in children, it happens in everywhere is this charge and discharge thing. So like imagine a child on a swing where you have this buildup of biological energy, of this rhythmic back and forth. And then let's imagine a moment of laughter. The laughter is a discharge. Okay. So you mentioned laughter as like a diagnostic, and I'm totally with you on this. If a person can have a deep belly laugh where the diaphragm is pulsing rhythmically and there's a sense of biological energy going through the body as a whole, and you can feel that, that is a diagnostic for somebody that is likely to have, soulgasms and have this kind of free flow of energy through the flute. Now with rigid types though, and this cuts, like rigid types tend towards kind of what I call OCD geography, obsessive compulsive geography. What does that mean? A lack of capacity to play, a lack of capacity to engage in artistic self-expression, and in a nutshell, be able to discharge in creative ways. Okay. Mm-hmm. So orgasm is a type of discharge, but if there's not and it really comes back to the emotions here. Okay. So, and OCD types are usually pretty bad with emotion. Rigid type people are usually pretty bad with emotions. If I trace back to that time in my life where I was obsessed with containment, I was really, really bad at emotional self-expression. And it wasn't until later that when I was doing all this work with men that I found my rage circuit and I found my grief circuits, and having those discharge pathways helped me to then loosen my rigidities. And even if I was choosing the containment in terms of ejaculation, then when the intensity ramped up in my body, I could, go like, you're whatever it is, you know what I mean? To kind of get the kind of plumage going on. If you have a container, you still want some element of effulgence, some element of radiance, i.e. discharge. But the discharge is more like almost like a gaseous discharge, because we are gaseous beings as well. I mean, We're constantly off-gassing, right?
Yes.
So it's the tempo of it that we get messed up in. So I guess the general comment here is that let's continue to focus on these basic binaries of charge and discharge, containment and expression. But when we're talking about expression, it's not just ejaculatory discharge, ejaculatory expression. It's that when the big energy comes up in the person, we have a longing to discharge. And then the question is, can we do it creatively? Like, for example, with rage is a discharge. That's often held in the rigidities of the body in terms of containment. And it's often held here in the jaw. And it's an essential developmental stage to be able to let the repressed rage come up and discharge. Otherwise, it's going to be held. And then so that, that we can be on the creative path of discharging aggression in a way that's creative. And so that would be one pathway. And it really does, and Reich was obsessed with this clinically, it deeply involves a relationship with emotions.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And
so I do want to add one other piece.
Please
so
do.
The periaqueductal gray in the midbrain is grand central station of emotion, according to Yak Panksepp. I'm Panksepian in the sense that, I'm really a midbrain researcher. I'm an embodied researcher. So I'm not just a, kind of like a neuroscience nerd that just knows the structures and all that stuff. I've been deeply engaged in embodied inquiry all my life, all my adult life. The periaqueductal gray, grand central station of emotion. But interestingly enough, Reich was right that the periaqueductal gray is a laughter center. There are pelvic control nuclei in the periaqueductal gray as well. Okay, so what does that mean? There are periaqueductal gray is sensitive to trauma. Okay, when trauma happens, it involves our emotions and dysregulatory state. But just think about sexual trauma, right? Or think about violence brought to the pelvis, as in circumcision. You have actually a conditioning of this deep emotional control center, which also has these pelvic control nuclei. So the pelvis in many ways is the final frontier. Reich thought that you should work on your discharge work and diversify and de-armor from the top down, and the pelvis is the last place because it's the most highly charged area of the body. You kind of start from the face and the eyes downwards. And he was really on to something when he knew that the de-armoring of the pelvis is critical to be able to release basic discharge of emotion, basic discharge of the laughter centers in the periaqueductal gray. Did I already say that?
Yeah.
And to really give the human these myriad ways of expressing the core potencies of the emotional system. So this guy, it depends what your map is. This guy can work on his modes of expression, his modes of playfulness. And to me, another hallmark of somebody that is capable of running this biological energy is their playfulness. And rigid types are not good at playing.
Yeah, that's so true. And one of the things that it's interesting is all you shared, and thank you so much, is that one of the things that I've encouraged this person to do is like go to a rage room and let things out, to go and do primal yells and to do things to offset that tension and all the things that they're just holding so much. Mm-hmm. But their rigidity pattern is not wanting to allow them to go and do that. So they're just like, oh, no, I don't really need to do that. But here I'm going to do these practices. And I'm just like, okay, you're still having challenges, but you're trying to hold and control way too much. And that's the part that's holding you back. But then their belief system is everything else. When I've held on so tight and pushed myself through to be at the top of in my business and the top of this, and to be a great husband and to be a great dad and go and hold all the things.
Yep.
So I just think I can apply that way of being to this. And I'm like, no, that way of being is actually what's creating the challenge with this.
Yep. So Reich had this thing that the downward, we got to be interested in the upward and the downward currents.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, this maps to Montauk Chia and microcosmic orbital. It's all about up and down and fluctuation.
Energy. Just different wordings for the same,
Yeah. If we stay with this image of a child on the swing, this is, a fluctuation of up and down, that the rigid type is essentially like a tube of toothpaste squeezed. And you used imagery like this, a tube of toothpaste squeezed. And when that happens, of course, energy goes up. And psychologically or somatic psychologically, the deep primitive terror is one of falling. And the fiercer edges of that are being returned to the earth and death. So the deep psychological element here is deep surrender, that the system is shocked and horrified about death and surrender and grief. Okay. So it might just be that grief, an encounter with mortality, an encounter with limitation is the way forward with this guy, as opposed to the rage direction.
Okay.
Also, of course, if we're thinking about downward, we're thinking about the exhale phase of the breath and engaging the parasympathetic system.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I'd take it to the bank. I would bet on this, every penny I have, that he's deeply armored in the face and the eyes and in the mouth. So to get, sometimes I do some kind of, and then also the vocal variability. So doing some kind of toning with him. Sound is very, very powerful in tantric encounters. Yes.
Yes.
Consciously moving sound as a waveform through the body and as a way of expressing. Here's expression again, discharging as a kind of gaseous plumage or as a waveform, the sound wave into each other and kind of circulating that in the wine barrel.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's
so something like that. And like maybe doing some facial mirroring, like, hey, let's loosen up your face and, do some silly things with the face just as a way of releasing the armoring here.
That's so interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, the 3 tenets of Tantra are breath, sound, and movement. And sound is like a thief and it steals attention from your body. So moaning and sounding during sex, women will be more orgasmic and more easily to be orgasmic when they have less tension in the body. Men will last longer and not have as much of a risk of finishing too fast, right? If they moan and use sound. And the challenge too is that they're a couple and they want to do things also. The wife is more like wants him to finish, even though he wants to last longer, because there's a lot of our children are here at home asleep in the next room and we don't want them to hear us. So they're not using any sound.
Yeah.
Right. And they're also, she's really nervous that if she doesn't want to traumatize the kids and then walk in on them.
Yeah.
So I've had other couples where I've said, go somewhere else and do your lovemaking where you can like use sound, and then they were able to last longer. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are with that, because that is just, that's all even part of both of them being very rigid and trying to control the situation so much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a good kind of mythical image for sacred sexuality is how much lightning can we hold in this container? The lightning of the great mystery of being, how much can we hold? But it's not just about holding. It's about being able to, because as we hold more, we do need to have ways that are creatively discharging as we build the potency. Okay.
Yeah.
If we don't have creative ways of discharging, then we will become rigid over time. Okay. So as the tension builds in the system, in the tantric encounter, right, to have creative ways of discharging, expressing, i.e. through sound. And when we're saying discharge through sound, it's very important to take note that it's not the patterned expression of what's easy for you and familiar and habitual in terms of your sound making. It's the explorative creativity of expression that then can be this plumage, or like a kind of effulgence or a radiance outside of this lightning containing space that sends off these great diversified colors of expression and sound and movement. And it really does become an art. It really does become an artistic space of creation and an expression of the universe creating, and this is where it becomes deeply, deeply cosmic, where new colors are being made. New forms of expression are being forged, not just a repeating of the same,
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I feel like I'm teaching people the art of sex. That there's an art, and it's like the creativity and the beauty of it and creating your own masterpiece with it, and even being messy with it and coloring outside of the lines, Yeah.
Yeah, I did want to touch on this other taboo element of magic, because again, like I was saying in the beginning, magic itself has a long history of being taboo, of being marginalized, of being judged as being evil and blunt-headed. And I go deeply into the anthropology of magic in my book. And one way of thinking about the universe is that it's magical, not magical as in that we can be in a space and where I wave the pen and I can create a whole universe or something like that. Or, I can put a witch hat on you just by going like this, like physically put a witch hat on you. But because we're talking about Tantra anyways and sacred sexuality, you already have a witch hat on, right? To some people.
Yes. Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the more far out taboo stuff in terms of sex magic. And how do we keep our feet on the ground about this stuff and be, as I look at the time, which is 11:11, we're in a weird space where it's like, there's always room for making connections and being in relationship with the symbols and all that stuff. So we can go far out there in terms of making kind of too much meaning and kind of spiral out and get uprooted from the ground. So what is your model about the interface between sex and sacred sexuality and magic and manifestation and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I love this question. Being born on Halloween just before midnight when I was a little girl, I remember watching Bewitched, and I always wanted to be magic. And if I could wiggle my nose, could I make something happen? But with Tantra, you learn you can wiggle other things and make magic happen. But it is all this creative energy and the tantric traditions of your bioelectric circuit. One of your circuit breakers, you might say, if it's not switched on, is where your sacral chakra is. And that's right around your navel area, right below your navel, your belly button. And this chakra is connected to your creativity and to your reproductive organs. It's interesting because it's also connected to your anus and to your mouth. So when people are repressed sexually, or if you say as women are older and they might be widowed or they're single and they're not self-pleasuring because they feel shame about it and they're not in their sexuality, they'll turn to food. And you'll hear women say these things like, oh, this tastes better than sex. It's because they're trying to stimulate that breaker switch that's been turned off, right? Because that's your creativity. So this is our life force energy. We were literally created from sexual energy. And we don't need to just use that energy to create a human life. We can use it to create the life our heart desires. And if you've read the book by Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, he talks about sexual transmutation used by the most successful people. And it's using this energy as your power center for your creativity and things to happen. Now, when I teach people around tantric sex magic, again, with great power, there's great responsibility. So it's doing it ethically. You're not trying to impose or take over someone else's free will. This is all about consent and focusing this towards what you're wanting for yourself. So, for example, if I'm wanting a lover that has, or maybe I have a friend and I wish they would be a lover, I'm not going to do a sex magic ritual and think of that person because with the intention of having the universe bring them to me as my lover, because that's manipulative, right? Mm-hmm. But I can think about what are the qualities I want in a lover? What is it that I desire? And the universe can be like, oh, this happens to be the match for you and bring it in. But I just have to know what the things are that I'm wanting to experience and have very high intentions when I'm creating this space. And then knowing that I want you to think with law of attraction, and you think about what it is that you're wanting to manifest. Whenever we are in an orgasmic state, the biocircuit is completely lit up. So we're like this beacon of light, almost to tune into more of the universal source energy. And then we feel a little bit out of our bodies when our orgasmicness. So if we can encapsulate or have something written, know what we're wanting to bring in when we're kind of a little bit more out and not so pulled into our bodies, we can act. It's almost like we're like Batman with the signal, right? We're sending our signal with our bioelectric circuit more out into the universe of what we're wanting to receive, and like a boomerang, having it coming back to us. But we need to be sure that we are also an energetic match for these things, that we're not manifesting. Like, if I want to have a partner that has certain values, do I embody these same values? Because like attracts like. So if I have this expectation of others, I need to also have that same expectation on myself. So with using this energy and adding it to manifestation techniques, it's like rocket fuel for those practices. And I've manifested so many amazing things through this. And some things I've manifested within 48 hours, and some things have manifested, or 36 hours even. Some things have manifested years later, because sometimes the universe has to put the cooperative components together for other things to be a match for it. And I actually had forgotten. And at the time I was living my manifestation, and Facebook reminded me of something I had written down 3 years before on this day 3 years ago. And I was actually in that experience with this person that I had shared this post with and written in that experience 3 years later. And I had forgotten about it. So it's really powerful. And then I guided one of my coaches I do couple sessions through Zoom, and I guided them on this beautiful practice. And she was thinking, I had her share in detail what she was wanting to experience as far as a new home. And they had sold their home in Australia, came to the States for a few months, weren't sure if they would permanently move here or what, but she was feeling she wanted to go back to Australia. And so she shared in detail what this home looked like. And within 2 weeks, she found that home online. And the woman that listed the home had my maiden name. When she shared the link with me later, she's like, you've got to see this. It's everything that I said during that session with you. And within 2 weeks, without even seeing it, because she's still in the States, she got the home. Wow. It was the exact thing. But she's also an embodiment coach. So she embodiment for business. So she's done the self-work of like, what are my subconscious beliefs, my limiting beliefs? You know, she's more open. So it shifted really powerful for her, because like also what are the blocks that we have or limiting beliefs that could keep it from flowing in? Awesome. So that was helpful, but it all just depends.
For sure. Yeah. I like it.
You know?
Yeah, I like it a lot. I really like this image of the Batman projection, that there's a projection out there. And I like to think that this stuff is actually physics.
Yes.
Okay.
There's so much more science to it than woo-woo.
Does it mean that it's always going to happen? No, we're living in a probabilistic universe. Okay. So it's like, you know, we got to carry limitations with us. But I think if you give yourself to the power and project, because that's another form of
surrender,
kind of off-gassing. You know, this discharge model, it's charge and discharge. You build up the charge, you hold the lightning in the container, and then you project it out as a waveform. Have you heard of the cymoscope?
I have heard about it, but I have heard a little bit about it, but enlighten me some more.
So the cymoscope is this incredible device that has translated or taken a snapshot of like a pictorial at a molecular level of sound waves passing into the medium of water. And at that moment of the waveform going through phase state transition from sound into water, there's a very precise signature of that level, that note of sound. Okay. And it's called a sound sigil. Okay. Which might as well be magical terminology, right? Because sigilization is a whole field of magic.
Magic,
right?
Yes.
So, you know, and this is my pitch for kind of like the exploration of sound in terms of the manifestation process, where there's actually a physics to this stuff. And it's not mumbo jumbo. The cymoscope shows us in real time that there is a specific signature to what you're putting out there, right? So this is really powerful stuff. I mean, and sound is very, very powerful. To put that, you know, manifestation vibe and get really, really clear and give a sound to it.
Begin to it.
We might even be able to call in the actual Batman or the Batwoman. Maybe, are you the Batwoman?
That's okay. We can call it Batman.
Batman or the Batgasm. Call in the Batgasm.
Amazing. I love how you're sharing this. And it also reminds me of one, it's so wild when we think about, how magic has had such a negative thing. Sex is so shamed. And that even back in the day that so many witches were burned at the stake. And we don't ever think about like, who were these people that were literally burning humans? It's crazy and bizarre to me. And I feel like my belief is that the witches were people that were tuned in to their biocircuitry and their own power that they had. And they wanted to kind of live off the land and connect into their own energy. And they didn't want to be property of men and be wives. And it made the patriarchy very upset. Like there's these women that aren't conforming to our system and they believe that they're powerful, more powerful than men. They must be, we have to get rid of them. This is bad. But it's like, really, these women, I think, were into their own power and their own magic, and they didn't want to sign up for the colonization and for the, limiting their power and being with men that wouldn't be comfortable with their power. Maybe they didn't even want to be with men. Maybe they knew they didn't want to have children.
Yeah.
So why is that always something that's so, and we are seeing that played out now because now the women in our society that are against like the patriarchy and things like that, sometimes they're referred to as witches as if this is an insult. Yeah. But I did this really powerful meditation and with this feng shui master, and she's actually did feng shui for Steven Spielberg and has done courses on Mind Valley. And she has changed this meditation up because it really clicked for me the first time she did it. But on her app, she did change the meditation up. But in it, she's like, it's this tubes of light meditation. She's like, imagine on top of your head, you have a magical hat that is like an arm length above. And that you have this energy of the magical hat. And she used to say on the meditation, because it clicked for me one day, but I think some people maybe got triggered by it. So she changed it. She goes, imagine at the top of your magical hat is a quantum point that's connecting the right and the left hemispheres of your brain. And she was guiding this meditation, and it made me think of a witch's hat. A witch's hat is actually high up and then comes to a point. And I was like, maybe they were understanding that their energy centers and they're protecting their energy, right, with these hats and bringing it to a point.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so fascinating to me.
That's
completely
really
nerd
cool.
out on this.
Yeah. One of my passions is actually, believe it or not, archaeology. And there's some ancient, really old images of figures with mushroom hats.
Yes, I've seen this.
Yeah. And like you have this kind of, obviously there's the connection with psychedelics with witches and henbane.
Which are magical.
Yeah. Henbane and the kind of deadly nightshade and stuff like that. Like all these different herbs and psychedelic herbs and the changing of consciousness and all that stuff. And somehow that just got thrown out as being evil. But I personally think that a lot of the deep layers of this stuff in terms from a psychological, sociocultural standpoint is a sort of deep womb envy and womb fear of the power of a woman's body to create and the kind of co-opting of that creative force and taking it in the direction of suppression and suppression of what? Of erotic potential in the man, the woman. It involves a lot of suppressed homoeroticism, which is deep in the masculine psyche.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's just tremendously destructive. I ran into a paper called The Prison of the Womb.
Wow.
Very powerful paper about how the origins of slavery are actually very, very deep, and they have to do with the kind of owning of women's wombs in terms of structuralizing the kinship systems, the ancient kinship systems, and how women were treated and blah, blah, blah. And it's called The Prison of the Womb. And I really do think it's like this co-option, the power in the woman to create. It's very, very sad because, like, what if we could just create together? Who'd have thought? What about if we could just, be innovative with how we can plug into spirit rather than just create these rigid beliefs and just keep on making others? And Nietzsche bemoaned the death of the great god Pan. He thought that the death of the great god Pan was an enormous tragedy on planet Earth. Now, Pan is the horny god. You know what I mean?
For a while, I was like, me too.
Right. And so it's like, clearly, like, duh, are we horny, humanity? Like, yeah, we're fucking horny. Okay. So like, get over it and let's just create together. Right. I mean, it's like, it's part of our endowment as a species that we have horns, that we're horny. You know what I mean? Does that make us evil? No, that gives us the potencies of the universe. And can we create creatively rather than destructively and through scapegoating, right?
And create with intention, high intention with manifesting. High intention, low attachment is so important. And knowing too, when I want to manifest something, I would like this or something better, because sometimes we limit ourselves and the universe, there's actually could be a better option for us. And then when you talk about so interesting about the paper about the prison of the womb, because right now all the rights of women having rights about their wombs are trying to be taken away. And this fear like continues to be perpetuated. And, the rise of the feminine energy is not to be the downfall of masculine energy. We need one another to coexist. The masculine and feminine, the balance is really beautiful. It's just the patriarchy has not just suppressed women, it suppressed men and had men disconnect from themselves, their emotions, and putting a lot of pressure on men in our society too. And it obviously hasn't been working so well for us. So that's
what came to me in just a moment of epiphany, Dominique, and I really appreciate the play here. I just really appreciate the conversation. Fun. This kind of silly, spontaneous off-gassing that came in my imagination was kind of the image of another place of armoring for me was around the anus, which is so common. And as you said, there's a connection between these pelvic nuclei and the mouth and the midbrain emotional system. So I had tremendous benefit in giving to myself and receiving anal massage as an essential aspect of de-armoring myself. So I was thinking to myself, I just had this sudden image of Trump sitting on an erotic witch's hat. Yeah. And just kind of unwinding. And Trump, may you have one of these soulgasms sitting on top of the witch's hat. Oh yeah, bring it on, Trumpy poo. Yeah, baby. Are you feeling it? Are you feeling it? Yes. Yes, Trumpy. What's going
on? He's definitely very repressed. And then he expresses his sexuality in very destructive ways, like to disempower the other instead of being empowered in himself. And one thing I do recommend for my clients as well is doing anal play, because in utero, before we differentiate between if we're going to be anatomically male or anatomically female, the same cluster of cells that creates the G spot in a woman creates the P spot or the prostate gland in males. And so men just unfortunately got their G spot shoved up their ass. And so I think that's why there's been so much homophobia, because if men would actually give themselves permission to relax in this space in their body and embrace it instead of fear it or shame it, then they would tap more into their power. And I think a lot of the structures and things in society are about disempowering us and shutting down our energy centers by pollution, our food, what we're taking in, the media, stress, fear. It's all like really trying to shut off our breaker switches. Yeah. But whenever you're actually able to be in that source of turn on, then you're actually turned on and fully expressed. And to know that if you're exploring your body, not that there's anything wrong with being gay, but you're not gay. Or if your lover does that with you, it's your body. And why should any part of your body be taboo? If anyone deserves to enjoy your body, it's you. And so I'm really big proponent of that. So I really love that you shared that.
Yeah, for sure. It's like what we all have in common from a really young age is the pleasure of taking a really good shit. You know what I mean? And that is like, that's shared by all of humanity. And it's just really simple, people. We all poop. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Shit
And it's like
happens.
men out there, just enjoy your poop a little bit more. That might be one step and stage appropriate for where you're at right now. And see if you can maybe give it some sound as a creative outgassing of your potential. Send out a Batman sigil with
Right.
with
And
with that. Oh,
And I feel like one thing that I believe that, Jesus Christ, I think he was just a person that all his biocircuitry was really on and lit up. And that's why he appeared like with a halo above him, because his energy was fully on and he was in his full empowerment. And that's really was scary to a lot of the world. But we've been told a lot of stories that are very disempowering about, religion, because then society wants to write a book. It's kind of like The Boy Who Cried Wolf, right? It's a lot of things. You got to think the Bible and everything was written at a time where there weren't jails, there weren't police force, and you wanted the 10 Commandments were written to control societal behavior and make people behave in a certain way.
yeah.
Yeah. But I think he was just a fully lit up being that was really tapped into the power of who he was. And a lot of us don't reach those levels of
More than likely, he was
expression.
not anal retentive.
More than
And,
likely not.
it's really interesting that the church and all of its rigidities have created a massively rigid anal sphincter for humanity. And guys out there, whether you're spiritual or not, everybody, right? Just
Yes.
enjoy your poops.
For your pleasure.
Enjoy your poop and enjoy your pleasure. See if you can get a little bit more playful with your forms of creative self-expression in Tantra and sacred sexuality and in life. So Dominique, really a pleasure to talk with you. It was really, really fun, really interesting.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Boundless Body Podcast. Please like us, share, subscribe, and until next time, stabilize, catalyze, and thrive.